In the Summertime. Written by Judy Astley. Read by Julia Franklin. The moral right of the author has been asserted. Chapter 1. Jack's ashes had been wedged into the car boot between the cat basket and Silver's bag. But something must have shifted, because every time Miranda drove round a bend, there was a thud from the back of the Passat. She risked a glance at her mother in the seat beside her, but Clare had the Guardian in her hand and her crossword face on, teeth clamped on her lower lip and the pen tapping lightly against her jawbone. Miranda considered whether she should stop in the next lay-by, on the pretext of checking the cat, and rearrange things, so Jack's urn would stop rolling around. He had never liked being a passenger. Being driven had made him feel a bit queasy, and even though he was now reduced to gritty grey dust, she still felt his remains should be made as comfortable as possible. "Grandad's got loose," Silver said, kicking the back of the driving seat with her new pink Converses. Miranda gripped the steering wheel more tightly. Now Silver had drawn attention to the thumping. Any minute now Clare would start a "Do you remember the time he—" conversation, which would certainly go on for the rest of the journey, with the only contribution from the back of the car being the click-click of Silver's thumbs on iPad and the tish-tish of too loud music leaking from Beau's headphones. Oh, and the roll-clunk of Jack. "You must let Mum talk about him," Miranda's sister Harriet had said on the phone, after Miranda had lightly grouched that she'd heard 3 times that day the story of when Jack had climbed onto the Cornwall cottage roof with a broom handle to poke down a trapped rook. Well, of course she let Clare talk about him. What did Harriet think she was going to do? Say, "Hey, enough of the memories now, Mum. He's been gone 6 months, move on." Sharing the role of listener would be a help, but Harriet was comfortably miles away, being ambitious in television in Salford and newly blissed up with a footballer boyfriend. Their sister Amy was living in France. The youngest, still, at 26, often referred to by Clare as the baby, and had copped right out, claiming she couldn't talk to their mother about Jack because it just upset her too much. "Has he, darling? Is that the thudding noise?" Clare looked up from the crossword and turned to Silver. Miranda looked in the rearview mirror and caught the full blast of Silver's glorious smile directed at Clare. These days it didn't often come Miranda's way. Silver, at the far end of being 13, was setting the tone for her teenage years, and more often than not giving her mother the hellcat face. "It doesn't matter, you know," Clare told her granddaughter. "He can't feel it." "He might," Silver said. "You can't be sure." "I think we can, Silv," Miranda said quietly, hoping Silver would take the hint that this was time to shut up a bit. Clare could still be tipped easily over the edge into tears. Soft, silent ones that simply fell from her eyes and down her face with no fuss and no noise, as if Clare were apologising for her sadness. Somehow, Miranda found this more heartbreaking than if Clare had hurled herself about in lavish displays of noisy grief. This was to the core mourning. Miranda couldn't share it, couldn't lighten that awful burden, whatever she tried. "Are we nearly there yet?" Clare's childlike question, the sudden change of focus, startled Miranda. Also, Clare should know the answer. That she'd had to ask was strange. For most of Miranda's childhood, right up to when she was nearly 17, the family had visited their cottage in Chapel Creek every summer. Clare had once known and driven every inch of the A30. "Well, we've passed Bodmin Moor," Miranda told her. "So, not long now. An hour tops." "This bit of road's new," Clare commented, putting the newspaper down on the floor and her pen in her bag, as if already neatly prepared for the journey's end. "But then it's been nearly 20 years. Everything changes." She sighed and dabbed a tissue at her eyes. "Everything bloody changes." And yet some things don't, Miranda thought.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?